why we're able to keep on going for 16 hours or so. Then as our bedtime approaches, this circadian arousal signal decreases, leaving that homeostatic buildup unopposed, and under normal circumstances, most of us, when we go to bed, we fall asleep pretty fast because there's that strong drive for sleep at that time because the circadian arousal has shut off at that time. What's coordinating all of this signal? Well, ultimately, it is that activity in the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It relates to the melatonin rhythm. So what happens with melatonin is, if it is not produced and secreted during the daytime, even if we turned out all the lights here and it was totally dark for a while, and you all fell asleep, doesn't mean your melatonin would go up. Melatonin through the daytime is very low. But as our bedtime approaches, the melatonin level comes up, sort of plateaus during the night when we're sleeping, comes down again in the morning. When melatonin interacts with those melatonin receptors in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, that helps to quiet down that arousal signal. That facilitates sleep onset. It reinforces that rhythm. So night after night after night, as our melatonin is coming up in the evening, not only is it helping us fall asleep pretty naturally, but also it is simply increasing the probability that the next night and the next night and the next night, at about the same time, we're likely to get sleepy again. So that's why it's these two systems together that typically are aligned just right to allow us to function the way that we do. That's why these are responsible for it. They can be separated. They're not intrinsically locked together. So I mentioned jet lag, people doing rotating shift work as well. Stay up all night trying to study, and you're going sort of against the grain of your biological system, both in terms of when you can get enough sleep, but also when you are most alert and able to function cognitively at your best. So middle of the night is definitely not the time to do that. So these two work together, homeostatic, circadian, it's happening to all of us on a daily basis, and it also explains a lot, so it's a really good model to keep in mind. Let's say you take a really great, nice long nap in the afternoon. Well, so think you have a buildup of homeostatic sleepiness. Well, if you spend it all on a nap, there's not going to be much there for you later on when you want to fall off to sleep. Well, that's okay if you don't have trouble with a sleep problem. Some people with insomnia, however, get into a lot of trouble when they do nap in the daytime because they need all the extra impetus that they can in order to be able to fall asleep when they want to. Some people run into trouble because they have variations in the timing of their circadian clock. And so for most people, this whole system is driving sleep from about 10 or 11 to maybe 6 or 7 in the morning. Well, we all know that people are at various extremes. There are some people who are early birds who get sleepy by 7 or 8 in the evening, and then by 3 in the morning, there's no chance of them sleeping anymore because the way their biological clock has shifted earlier. Awful lot of people are shifted the other direction, people who are night owls, people who have no trouble staying up late, and then given the opportunity, can sleep well until the next day, perhaps the next afternoon. Saw a woman in our sleep clinic yesterday who is going to bed about 6 or 7 in the morning, and she's sleeping until about 3 in the afternoon. She's getting enough sleep, but she's very frustrated because it's really inconvenient for her to be sleeping, and it's not a simple matter of choice for her because of the strength of the biological rhythm. We think there is a pretty big genetic influence on these tendencies, but habits as well have a lot to do with it. It's certainly true that developmentally there's an influence. Younger children tend to sleep a relatively long period of time, 8, 9 hours or so if you're lucky and you're a parent. But around adolescence, there is a shift later. There's a natural tendency to stay up later and then sleep later. This is not a matter of wanting to stay up later and IMing and text messaging and watching TV and things like that. It really is that sleepiness is simply not coming on as early. And then the next morning, it's not laziness that has them sleeping later, and this probably includes some of you as well. It's truly the biological clock that's promoting sleepiness is still very active later in the morning. It can be an inconvenience to a certain degree for a lot of people. It certainly doesn't correspond with the school schedules. My kids get on the bus at 6:45 in the morning when they really ought to be sound asleep still. I'm sure their learning is somewhat impaired because of the sleep deprivation, because I assure you they're not getting to sleep 8 to 9 hours prior to the time they have to get up in the morning, but we manage that as best we can. In any case, so there is this natural tendency to phase delay somewhat. I see the people in our clinic who go go really far and get into a lot of trouble because they simply cannot get up for school, or they're failing multiple. I've had people come in with letters from the dean from colleges saying you're being expelled unless you solve this problem, and so it can be quite severe. And actually, that's an important transition, high school to college. So kids who have this tendency to be sage and late night owls sometimes can manage it okay late in high school because there are parents that are dragging them out of bed, they're going outside every day, they're getting sunlight exposure in the morning, reinforcing their clock, and so even though their tendency is to be night owls, it's sort of propped up biologically because light exposure helps influence the timing of this whole rhythm. And so they manage all right, perhaps on vacation, summertime, they may drift to be severe night owls and sleep half the day, but then with the school year again, they're okay. But then they go off to college and everything totally falls apart because there's variability in the schedule. Some days you have to get up early, some days perhaps don't have classes until later, and there are no parents there, and there are a lot of good things to do all night long, whether it's studying or socializing. And so some of those kids get into quite a lot of trouble just because of the biology of their sleep-wake cycle. So I emphasize that there's a developmental influence, there is a direct genetic influence that leads some people to have a stronger tendency in that direction. There's also a behavioral influence as well, because there are things that people do to make that problem even worse. And so one of the questions that I ask people who seem to follow this kind of pattern is, do you have much light coming in your bedroom window? And sometimes they get dramatic responses like, oh, no, I hate the light. I've got blackout curtains. People call me Dracula. You can appreciate the fact that by doing that, it makes it a whole lot easier to sleep later. But part of the reason is because they are depriving themselves of that biological signal, the morning light, which we really depend upon for our clock to be reinforced. And so part of what we do with people in trying to solve their sleep problems is to consider their exposure to light and darkness at various times. So at least for people with this kind of problem, we're inclined to maximize their exposure to bright light when they're getting up earlier in the day. So I mentioned the developmental influence around adolescence, this whole cycle shifting somewhat later. As we age, it comes somewhat earlier. And so we know a lot of older people who sort of fade out earlier in the evening, but then early in the morning by 4 or 5 or 6, not able to sleep anymore, so perhaps getting up earlier than they did before. So this is sort of an overview of the general pattern of sleep and the primary things that seem to regulate it for a lot of people. I do believe, as I mentioned in the beginning, that we are pretty much a sleep-deprived society. I think there are a whole lot of reasons for it. I believe that culturally we tend not to value sleep very much. What I didn't mention for the introduction is I spent my early days as an anthropologist, did graduate work for a while, so I have a special interest in the cultural influences on our behavior. And so, as I say, I think as a culture, we really don't value sleep. We are ready to do anything else other than sleep. A lot of people feel that sleep is a waste of time, and they imagine